Okay,
in that regard.
so let's keep going with this one, because I think this now what he's doing in this comment, I should have set this up maybe a little bit more. What he's doing in this comment in this clip, he's kind of now going to start forming what he is calling his radial ecclesiology. So I think this is actually where he's going to give you points of bilateral ecclesiology and he's going to start to show you the difference. So now he's talking about bilateral ecclesiology and kind of exactly what it teaches, as opposed to what he's going to present.
Composed of Jewish believers in Yeshua, practicing Judaism as an expression of their national identity and covenant fidelity. And then there's the Church of the Uncircumcision. This is Gentile believers in Yeshua practicing Christianity. So, and this idea is based on the words of Paul in Galatians when he says, he makes this important statement. He says, I have been entrusted, this is Paul speaking, I have been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter have been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised.
I got to stop it. What does Paul actually tell us that the gospel is? In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. There wasn't two gospels according to Paul. There wasn't a gospel to the Gentiles and a gospel to the Jews. So he's mixed this category up. Not only that, but the idea, now, granted, he's talking about Kinzer's view here, but he's going to talk about radial ecclesiology, and it's still this idea that the Gentiles should not be keeping the things that bring on Jewish identity.
We can't let that Galatians 2 quote go without looking at the rest of Scripture. Obviously, what I believe Paul's point is making is that Paul's aware that he's a newcomer on the scene. Paul's aware that Peter was the one who preached at Pentecost to Israel, and that there's been many believers coming to faith, many Jewish Israelites, right, coming to faith in Yeshua through what God was doing through Peter, and Paul's acknowledging that. But at the same token, Luke makes it clear in Acts that Peter also ministered to non-Jews. Acts 10, right, for example. So, and then Paul himself went and preached to Jews. Sometimes he was fruitful, like Berea was a big fruitful. Sometimes communities divided, some believe. But Paul found a lot of fruitfulness under Gentiles. And that's all. That's the only point Paul's making. But these guys see that. See, it must be two churches. Peter's duty was to Jews, Paul's to Gentiles, and therefore we have two canons. We have Paul's writings, which are the Gentile Bible canon, and Peter and James and John's writings, which are to the Jews. And we actually have a canon within a canon, and that Messianic Jews should primarily read only that stuff written by Peter, because he was the preacher to the circumcision. And we should avoid and let Gentiles read Romans and Galatians, because that's for them.
See, but here's the thing. Now, I wrote this down. I'll read what I wrote. I said Lancaster is going back to his Christian roots on this because he is assuming salvation is justification. To accept what Lancaster is truly saying in radial ecclesiology as well as within bilateral ecclesiology, you have to believe there are two separate ways of salvation. Since sanctification is part of salvation, which we see throughout Scripture, if there is two separate ways of sanctification, one for a Jew and one for a Gentile, then there are two ways of salvation within the body of the Messiah. Do these guys even realize what they're doing? Does Kinzer even realize what he's doing? They're saying that there's two separate ways of salvation.
Right, and here's one thing that I see in Kinzer's work that was a little bit frustrating when Kinzer's writing about Acts 15. He talks about how these Gentiles become pure by faith. He fails to unpack the fact that what Peter's point is that only in Yeshua does one obtain a clean heart and have the Torah written on it. In other words, it's Jews too need to come to Yeshua to have pure heart.
Yeah.
That Jews who they could practice outwardly all the Torah they want, but unless they're in Yeshua, their heart is impure. I mean, that's just, and that might sound, people say, well, that's anti-Semitic to say it. Well, that's the point of in Acts 15. It's a purity of heart comes through faith in Yeshua, whether you're Jew or a Gentile. And that's the new covenant being fulfilled where God puts his Torah on our heart, and we see our sin, we see our need for him, we see that we have nothing apart from him, and we confess our need to him. We confess that we are sinners in need of his salvation, and we desire to grow in knowledge of grace and his holiness, in wisdom, in love, and understanding, and all those most weightiest matters of the Torah. And what Paul time and time again is saying is that these Jewish groups out there that are trying to convince you to be circumcised or do you need this or that, is that they're not walking in the Torah of the Messiah. They don't understand love your neighbors yourself. Why? They might be able to recite it, but they're not thinking of it. Their orientation is not new creation in Messiah.
Yeah,
love
exactly.
your neighbors yourself.
Yes.
They're thinking it. I mean, you can read the Book of Jubilees. You can read all these other sectarian books from the Dead Sea Scrolls. They quote the same scriptures. They quote the just shall live by faith. They quote love your neighbors yourself and these types of things. But if you look at the context, they take those scriptures to mean something very different. And that is man-made religion. That's not new creation life in Yeshua. And that's the message that just does not come through in post-missionary Messianic Judaism. It's this idea that God's doing something. He's creating a new kind of human in Messiah. And if you're in him, you are a new creation. You are born again. You're born from above. You have an orientation to the heavenly Jerusalem, Paul calls it. And that's you. That's your identity. If there's any identity that's being promoted time and time again in the apostolic writings, it's new life, new resurrection life in Messiah Yeshua. That's it. And that it will bear fruit. And it will bear fruit. But this idea of Jewish identity or Jewish practice, all of a sudden we're not talking about Torah anymore. We're not talking about God's commandments. We're not talking about sin and holiness. We're talking about Jewish practice. Well, look all through the Bible. You're never going to find the phrase Jewish practice. Jewish identity. Look through all the Bible. You're never going to find something explained to you, Jewish identity. So what we do is we make these little ideas that sound appealing, and we build castles with them. But those castles, the storm's going to come, waters are going to come, and it's going to wipe those things away.